Sean todos muy bienvenidos. Yo soy Chena Mazo, soy del movimiento de afectados y afectadas por represa de Brasil y de la Vía Campesina. Quería darles la bienvenida al evento paralelo virtual Vivo y Planteando el Tratado Vinculante sobre las Transnacionales de Derechos Humanos. Está organizado por la Campaña Global para reclamar la soberanía de los pueblos, desmantelar el poder de las transnacionales y poner fin a la impunidad. En ocasión de la sesión del Consejo de Derechos Humanos de las Naciones Unidas. Recalcar que hay interpretación para inglés y castellano para los que llegan, el botón abajo. Agradecer muchísimo a los intérpretes que siempre están con nosotros y haciendo que este trabajo sea posible. También agradecer al Transnational Institute, Asia Europe People Forum, Fox on the Global South y también a Amigos de la Tierra Internacional por la organización de este espacio. Nosotros vamos a contar con nuestros panelistas con una presentación inicial y luego ustedes pueden poner las preguntas, las dudas en el chat, que vamos a juntarlas para una ronda final para contestar también. Si quieren también pueden compartir materiales y discusiones que tienen de sus organizaciones. También le pedimos muchísimo para apoyar con la hashtag Tratado Vinculante o Stop Corporation Impunity para también apoyar el evento. Recordar que nosotros, organizaciones de la sociedad civil organizadas en la campaña, hemos participado de la 6ª sesión del Grupo de Trabajo Intergubernamental de Composición Abierta para construcción del instrumento jurídico vinculante sobre empresas transnacionales, con muchos esfuerzos porque las condiciones de trabajo no estaban buenas en virtud de la situación de pandemia en todo el mundo. Fue muy difícil para las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, los movimientos sociales de comunidades afectadas, aportar y llevar su voz también a este espacio de negociación, pero sí un trabajo de movilización virtual para que todo eso sea posible. También decir que es muy importante la movilización en nivel regional y también vamos a compartir un poco las experiencias de consulta que se hicieron antes de la 6ª sesión, como las consultas en África, América Latina y Asia. También un largo trabajo de movilización con los estados nacionales, con académicos y con otras organizaciones que trabajan duro y fuerte en la resistencia a las actividades transnacionales. También decir que nosotros hemos presentado un documento recalcando la importancia de la discusión del tratado vinculante que sea alrededor de la resolución 26.9, o sea, que firme una posición de crear obligaciones a las empresas transnacionales y mantener más vivo que siempre el tema de los derechos humanos presentes en las negociaciones. Bueno, agradecer muchísimo a todos que también están acá hoy para compartir y luego ya empezamos dando la palabra a la compañera Hakmi Hertan, que es de Indonesia for Global Justice, también hace parte de la Asia Task Force. Bienvenida, Rak, tienes la palabra.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm Rahmi from Indonesia, and I'm also I'm here to representing the Asian Task Force for the legally binding treaty. So in my presentations, I will share with you about how far that the Asian region has started our work in relations to the interventions process on the legally binding instruments on business and human rights. So yeah, the Asian Task Force itself is a regional member of the Global Campaign to reclaim people's sovereignty and dismantle corporate power. We are the coalitions of civil society organizations and community-based organizations in the region of Asia, which has been working in the field of promotions and protections of basic rights, and has been developing a constructive advocacy for the legally binding instruments. The Asian Task Force is developing advocacy on legally binding instrument as we text the LBI as both necessary and practical in defending human rights in relations with the transnational context and setting up transnational conduct of commercial entities. So far, the Asian Task Force has been engaging governments, especially the non-aligned movement and international community and UN, to set a norm and mechanism as strong mechanisms against human rights violations by corporate entities and any forms of international and bilateral trade agreements. This would also imply a guarantee of mutual legal assistance and international cooperation carried in accordance with international human standards to prevent human rights violations in the context of business activities and provide access to justice and effective remedy. So the Asian Task Force has been conduct communications, learning sessions, and counter-interpretations work against free trade agreements. This set of works and advocacy is to capacitate affected communities and the member of Asian Task Force in setting protections. This includes indigenous peoples, workers, women, communities affected by extractives. In several instances, the Asian Task Force member took direct against, including protesting Sitting Big project with cost damage and pillage the commons. The Asian Task Force also emphasized the effective remedies and reparation measures. This shall take into account the differentiated impacts of human rights abuses on specific groups in order to respond adequately to these impacts and their particular needs to consider harm that could appear in the future. The remedies and reparations should follow the set of home and hosts in which due diligent rights to access to fair and just form implies. In the case where the abuses occurred as or in conflict areas, the liability of transnational corporations involved in conflict should be followed also in the very set of home and host. Having working on this, the Asian Task Force also takes a particular attention against free trade agreements because this FTA effectively dictates and affects domestic human rights protections. In itself, the FTA violates human rights norms and mechanisms, especially against the good ones already in place. The conflicting norms should remind government and the UN that primacy of human rights shall not be altered. The Asian Task Force demands state parties to guarantee that companies comply with these requirements of human rights standards. A competent authority is fundamental of this guarantee. In international setting, the establishment of an independent international treaty implementation mechanism whose decision must be followed is fundamental. Therefore, our work is to bring the voice of affected communities for rights of all affected communities and individuals, especially in Asian. Thank you so much for my intervention.
Muchas gracias, Hakmi, por la intervención. Quería dar la palabra ahora a Manja Baya, de Indigenous People Rights International, también de la Asia Task Force. Tenéis la palabra, Manja.
Thank you so much. I am Manja. I'm from the Indigenous Peoples Rights International. It is an organization that was born out of the need for a united action to stop the criminalization of Indigenous peoples worldwide. In the past years, there has been a drastic increase in attacks and acts of violence against or criminalization and threats that are aimed at Indigenous peoples, particularly those arising in the context of large-scale extractive industries, agribusiness, infrastructure, hydroelectric dams, and logging. We have seen how the laws and courts of governments were used to legalize criminalization, violence, and intimidation. Anti-terrorism laws are being used, especially in Latin America, in Asia, to red tag indigenous, environmental, and land rights defenders by branding them as either terrorists or communists and treating them as criminals. In the last 3 months, I think the Philippines ranked high in the most number of attacks against indigenous peoples. 2 days before the New Year, 9 indigenous peoples were massacred in simultaneous raids conducted by state forces at dawn when people were still sleeping. 16 others were arrested and charged with illegal possession of firearms and ammunitions. A witness to the planting of evidence during the raids was later on killed, and the lawyer who was assisting those who were charged in court was physically attacked and stabbed in the head. This indigenous community is among those who have been opposing the construction of a mega dam that will inundate their territories. The dam is being funded by transnational corporations and financial institutions, and the contracts for the construction of the dam were made without a free, prior, and informed consent of the indigenous peoples concerned. These violations are occurring in different indigenous communities in the world in the context of intensified competition for and exploitation of natural resources. In several countries like Bangladesh, India, Philippines, Mexico, Colombia, increased militarization and operation of private armed groups even add to the threats against indigenous peoples. Many of the displacements of indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands and the extrajudicial killings of activists happen in communities where there are ongoing struggles against corporations. It must be noted that there's more than 90% of the world's remaining natural resources that are located in indigenous peoples' territories. But these territories are the most exploited by corporate activities. Corporate activities have depleted and polluted indigenous territories and have resulted to human rights violations that heavily impact on ancestral domains and natural resources and the very existence of indigenous communities. To make matters worse, there is also a high level of impunity of corporate misconduct. There is lack of redress mechanisms and lack of access to justice. And in most cases, states themselves are without the necessary laws to hold corporations accountable for human rights abuses. National legal frameworks continue to be very weak in terms of ensuring protection of human rights, and an international legally binding instrument on business and human rights could contribute to redressing gaps and imbalances in the international legal order that undermine human rights. It is surprising, though, that in the past years, very few indigenous peoples participated in the negotiation of the binding treaty despite the undeniable impact of corporate activities on their rights, their lands, territories, and their role in protecting the world's natural resources. In the past months, our organization, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights International, together with other Indigenous peoples' organizations and support groups, organized a global learning session for Indigenous peoples on the LBI. The learning sessions received a high number of participation from all the global regions, and alarmingly, more than 90% of them have not heard at all or had minimal knowledge about the treaty negotiations. And building on these learning sessions, we hope to be able to get more indigenous peoples involved in the process of the treaty negotiations, whether this is virtually or in person. And we also hope that beyond the civil society international campaign at the UN and at the international level, an even bigger campaign is also done on the ground to raise the awareness of communities and grassroots about this process. For indigenous peoples, the proposed treaty must at a minimum uphold the rights of indigenous peoples to their lands, territories, and resources, uphold the right to self-determination, thereby making mandatory the requirement of free, prior, and informed consent for indigenous peoples, provide a strong redress mechanisms for victims, and ensure the participation of indigenous peoples in the treaty negotiations. So I will end here to give time for questions later. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Manja. Muy fuerte el testigo. Ahora invitar la palabra a Vidya Jinker, que es de Grow for Watch, Indian Social Action Forum, y también miembro de la Asia Task Force. Tenéis la palabra.
Thank you. I come from India, as you know, and well, just like those before me have, where I come from, is waiting for some kind of justice to be done. So regulation, polluter pays, all these kinds of principles that might work well in countries in the global north don't seem to work so well here. We have corporates who are supported actively by the government and ranged against the people. So very often we have the government and the corporates working together against the people. We see this in the case of the big farmer protests that are currently ongoing, where the state and the police on behalf of corporations that want to get into big kind of grain storage and transportation, are bringing down all kinds of abuses, not allowing our people even the freedom to access the capital city of India in order to express their angst against the 3 farm laws. Therefore, views of activists and project affected people and their advocate defenders. We know of arbitrary arrests, we know of cases gone horribly wrong, and I'd like to bring you a couple of cases from my own country, India. We all know of the big corporate crime on the Indian people, which dates back to the 2nd of December, the Union Carbide, when Union Carbide International, and it was a small case of water entering a kind of capsule of methyl isocyanide. But the kind of tragedy that went across Bhopal city, which is in Madhya Pradesh, a state in India, meant that people are still suffering from what happened that night. So 2nd and 3rd of December 1984, and even now there are people streaming to clinics affected by the tragedy, by the gas of that night, and you have children born with so many problems till date. Government statistics will tell you 5,000 affected, etc. But we know that there are 570,000 people affected, either with direct deaths or with long-term impacts of the gas tragedy. How much did they get in compensation? They got about 400 USD in total. And even if you go to a good clinic, that money will run out so very fast. There are people who have been struggling now for 35, 36 years with the impacts, with the health impacts of that tragedy. How are they supposed to manage? The Union Carbide boss, CEO, was never really, made to pay for what his company had done. He escaped and he died a death somewhere out of India's shores. The company sold itself to Dow Chemicals, which said, oh, we are not responsible for what our predecessors did. Who is responsible then? That is why we need a legally binding instrument on transnational corporations. Bhopal, you will read enough about across the world. There is also the case of POSCO, which is in Orissa, where a South Korea, steel producers, was operating through its wholly owned subsidiary POSCO India, and it wanted to open iron ore mines, a steel plant, a captive port facility, and related transportation, all of which amounted to a huge amount of land to be taken over, to more than 12,000 acres. And it was the Orissa government, the state government, that said, yes, come, we will provide you the land. And therefore you had the state picking up land forcibly, raining down on people in so many ways, and there were no measures of reparation offered to the project affected communities, insufficient compensation, jail cases, arbitrary arrests, destroying of their beetle mines, of their motorbikes, etc. The full spectrum of harm that you can think of played out on behalf of the South Korean company. But the South Korean company, when confronted with all this, said, no, 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 all this happened by the state government. But the state government was acting on behalf of the South Korean company. And somehow that nexus between state and corporation needs to be broken. And that is what we are expecting. This kind of thing that happened in POSCO and the anti-POSCO movement headed by POSCO Pratirod Sangram Samiti was quite iconic. In fact, my group INSAF also got the flack from the government for actively supporting the anti-POSCO movement. But we see that people's resistance on the ground, do not get the kind of support from either the courts or from the government, which is why we are looking elsewhere. We are looking for this kind of UN process to help out. I would like to also talk about another case, and tell me if I'm running out of time. So this kind of case, as I was saying, the POSCO kind of case, you'll see across India, and not just in India, but in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, even in Sri Lanka. So we need to also focus on one of our own. The Adani Group is somebody who's grown from India across, its shores, has picked up mines in Australia, and they're going to have they're going to have coal brought in all the way from Australia to land up in a port in Orissa, the same state where POSCO wanted to set up their shop. And remember, the land that was picked up so badly by the state for POSCO means that it hasn't gone back to the people. The company has said it's taken too long, we're going away, but it's gone back to another corporation. So the state always does that. But okay, the coal from Australia for Adani comes all the way through a transportation company that he fronts. It comes to a port in Orissa. It goes via land to another state in India called Jharkhand, a place called Godda. They will, they are now picking up, they have to it. People have faced all kinds of repression so that the government picked up the land and gave it to Adani. Adani Power now will make this power there. The land, the company is right now constructing the power complex. Yes, I'm finishing.
The time,
and the power produced will go to Bangladesh. The power produced will go to Bangladesh, and that is what we are talking of, not just our international people, creating the situation, TNCs creating the situation, but Indian TNCs are also quickly following suit. So we need to, I think, up our game and come through strongly with the legally binding instrument that we also want. Thank you.
Gracias, Villas. Perdona por haber cortado. Ahorita vamos a pasar un poco a la región de África y queremos dar la palabra a Keia, que es de Alternative Information Development Center. Tienes la palabra, Kea, por 5 minutos.
Hi everyone, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm excited about the title of actually the side event, which is saying that basically the system and the process is alive and kicking. And in essence, though, for us as different civil society organization in the African continent, and particularly in Southern Africa, last year close to the sixth session of the Intergovernmental Working Group, we hosted our own sort of regional consultation to sort of bring us together and to figure out what is our stance in relation to the second revised draft. I mean, it is particularly clear for us as African civil society and particularly grassroots organizations on the African continent that the second revised draft has sort of had cosmetic changes and still doesn't cover the necessary gaps that were in the previous revised draft. So things like, for example, the change in scope are things that are particularly pernicious for us. Issues around the fact that we actually need direct obligations for transnational corporations is something that is particularly important for us in the African context. Just to say, I've got a little bit ahead of myself to introduce myself properly. I'm Gail Sepato, and I coordinate the Southern African campaign to dismantle corporate power based in the Alternative Information Development Center in Cape Town. I'm working with a lot of affected communities affected by mega development or extractivism development. And in conversation with other civil society organizations and grassroots organizations in the African continent, we spoke about during our consultation, like I mentioned, that we need direct obligations. The previous speaker spoke about how, for example, transnational corporations and governments are in bed with one another. And we're hoping that the legally binding instrument will actually break that relationship or sever these ties. And the issue around direct obligations for us is very important because ever so often states will say, no, it's a transnational corporation,
Yeah,
and transnational corporations—
only speak more slowly for in the interpretation, please.
Sorry about that. Sorry. Transnational corporations will say that, no, it's the state that needs to do something. States will say that, no, it's the transnational corporation that will say that has to do something. And sometimes, ever so often, we find ourselves that African states enter into agreements with these transnational corporations so they can be able to benefit and make money. So we talk about fat cats in government who are profiting, and the only thing that's left is devastation, destruction, and pain for affected communities. Interestingly enough, one of the most important things that also came out of our consultation is that we're demanding that affected communities not only have free, prior, and informed consent, but actually have the right to say no, which basically means that it's not just solely about consultation, so being told about what's going to happen or being asked. We're saying that we're not interested necessarily in being told and asked, but we want to be at the forefront of decision-making processes. And we're thinking that if free, prior, and informed consent is expanded to really look and grab the right to say no and be placed within the legal binding instrument, it can be a preventative measure to tackle the issues of corporate impunity within the region and within the African continent as a whole. We also hope and really want to push through the positions of the global campaign to dismantle corporate power that we want an international court, which will be a mechanism to hold these transnational corporations accountable. We don't just want a legally binding treaty that exists and is ratified without a mechanism to hold these corporations accountable. I think all the stories and examples given by the previous speakers are some examples and stories that we find in the African continent itself. And just like we're saying in our side event that the process is alive and kicking, now is the moment for us to implement and push to get a legal binding instrument, because no longer can we live under these conditions. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Kea. Quería ahora dar la palabra al chica, es difícil, de Africa Europe Faith and Justice Network, que también va a traer por práctica. Bienvenido.
I hope you're all hearing me.
Yes.
Kia has spent a lot of time speaking on the content and demands from African perspective. I'm going to talk about mobilization in Africa. And I speak that on the platform called Our Land is Our Life, which began in 2015 to bring the church and the civil society together to work together on land issues. All various of lands issues, human rights and community rights violations occasioned by land grabbing by the TNCs, forms of corporate impunity, Africa's land and food systems, natural occurring resources, criminalization of human rights defenders, just go on, the list goes on and on. But all these processes were originally in silos, at national governments or regional government, but we find something lacking. There's no strong instrument to really pursue this further. And so when we had the African consultation, civil society consultation in 2019, it was a game changer for this platform. So we find that as a common denominator to channel all our lobbying. And since then, we have done a lot of mobilization from different African countries using the ecclesiastical church structures in 2019 and 2020, going as far as mobilizing grassroots movement for them to be actors in their own lives, not people, not just recipients of what other people can do for them. For us, the church actors, this binding treaty is a kind of life or death, because we know that it holds key to resolving a number of issues in Africa. We see in it a window to holding TNCs accountable for their impunity in view of Africa's weak and corrupt democratic institutions that Shell has been convicted for their impunity in Nigeria as impetus to this conviction and drive. It is also a tool of engagement with state actors who are collaborators with the TNCs, because the TNCs can just come into Nigeria without the collaboration of the state actors. So it is going to be a tool for us to engage them for all various of human rights violations and ecological destruction. It's also a practical tool for us of bringing ethics and social values into the field of business and current economic models, making business to serve life instead of extinguishing life. And why is this way of working now with civil society important for us? We need to bring the comparative advantage of each to serve the other. First, in Africa, the church needs the expertise of the civil society. The church is not a repository of knowledge, and so needs the expertise of the civil society to understand some of the technical issues involved. And in a lot of our mobilization, we have been using the church structures to draw the attention of the state actors to the resource that is available with the civil society, that they should consider the civil society as partners, collaborators, rather than agents, criminals to fight against. The civil society also needs the power of the church in Africa. The church has her institutional structures to the communities directly impacted by corporate impunity, and so have direct experience of corporate impunity. The state actors trust more the testimony of church actors, and working with civil society gives more credibility to the work of the civil society who have the expertise. The church has easier access to influential state actors, some of whom are loyal members of the church, so the church leverages on that link. In Muslim-dominated African countries, the state actors also have ears for the church and tend to listen when they speak because of their commitment to social works in abandoned rural communities. Finally, we are stronger when we bring our energies together. The struggle is about the survival of our shared humanity and common home, and so it has to be a common struggle. That is why the platform has continued to draw inspiration from the African proverbs: when spiders unite their webs, they tie a lion. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Chica. Ahora vamos a pasar a las informes y discusiones de la región latinoamericana. Quisiera dar la palabra Ahora a Alejandra Scampini del Poder. Bienvenida. Tenés la palabra.
Hola, buenos días. Hola, gracias, Chena. ¿Se me escucha bien?
Súper bien.
Perfecto. Bueno, agradecer a la campaña global por invitar a Poder a este conversatorio regional para poder revitalizar las conversaciones sobre el tratado. Muy brevemente, Poder es una organización con más de 10 años de trabajo en la región, que busca fomentar la transparencia y rendición de cuentas de las empresas en América Latina, con un fuerte trabajo desde la perspectiva de derechos humanos, desde las comunidades y también desde una perspectiva de género. Y es en ese espíritu que desde el 2016 entramos a este proyecto histórico y tan urgente que es el Tratado Vinculante, especialmente porque uno de los países que levanta esta propuesta es Ecuador, en nuestra región querida, y desde allí, y recuperando aquella resolución, es que muchos de nosotros en América Latina nos sumamos a esta iniciativa. Y también porque es una región con una alta prevalencia de actividad empresarial transnacional, con mucha violencia a defensores de derechos humanos, que eso ya es notorio, y realmente para nosotros que trabajamos, ¿no?, en la región, tratando de documentar casos, el Tratado Vinculante se transformó en la herramienta de aglutinar un movimiento en la región. Y para eso creamos desde el 2016, junto a muchas organizaciones de la Alianza por el Tratado, de la Red DES, y junto con la campaña Conversatorios Regionales. Creo que la región de América Latina fue una de las primeras en iniciar esta regionalización y adecuación de los debates a nuestras necesidades. Y una de las cosas que, por ejemplo, levantamos con mucha fuerza fue la mirada feminista, en un proceso que era muy neutro, desde una mirada que carecía de perspectiva de género, perspectiva de las diversidades, migrantes, defensoras. Así que eso creo que fue un elemento fundamental que también levantamos con la región y sumamos a otras voces. Mi presentación hoy se va a estar basando sobre todo en nuestro último conversatorio. ¿Sí? Tuvimos un conversatorio de cara a la última sesión de octubre del año pasado, en un contexto pandémico, en un contexto donde la sociedad civil iba a participar, como siempre desigual, pero aún mucho más debido a las brechas digitales. Y realizamos, previo a la consulta, un conversatorio sobre el contexto de la región, sobre el tratado vinculante, un debate político muy interesante con participación de activistas sindicales, movimiento feminista, algunas participantes académicas, gente con trabajo en temas ambientales, y con eso fuimos muy preparados a octubre. Y yo quiero destacar qué es diferente de aquel momento del 2016 a lo que relevamos en ese conversatorio. Lo primero, y eso fue algo que compartimos entre todas las organizaciones, es que este tratado borraba el foco en aquello que le dio origen, ¿no?, en lo transnacional. Y en un lenguaje que realmente nos diera luces sobre cómo se iba a revertir la impunidad. Entonces, si bien desde la sociedad civil todavía no hay un acuerdo, no somos un grupo tan homogéneo, lo que sí estamos de acuerdo es que todavía no hay un lenguaje que ponga el foco en lo que es hoy evidente. El poder de las transnacionales ha aumentado, estas son más poderosas que muchos de los países del sur, eso está documentado en la forma en que facturan, y de esta manera llegamos a un momento en que este capitalismo financiero global, que comienza desde antes, y hay muchos estudios sobre esto, hoy fuertemente está liderado por estos capitales y esta élite corporativa. Y esto todavía no se refleja cómo se va a atacar eso tan estructural. Entonces, cuando se habla de que en el texto se aplicará a todas las empresas, incluyendo a las pequeñas y medianas, preocupa, ¿no? Preocupa porque ese es el foco. Existen casos diferentes en distintos países, pero lo que sí preocupa es que no se puede perder el foco en lo transnacional, y que éstas tengan exista el lenguaje que nos hable de las obligaciones directas. y en eso se está hablando de forma académica, desafíos del derecho internacional, pero como movimiento social político, esto es claro que es una necesidad y que todavía no está, es más, se pierde en cosas que se habían avanzado en borradores anteriores. Lo segundo que sale muy fuerte de nuestra región, y esto es algo que lo han dicho otras colegas aquí en el conversatorio, es que este crecimiento de las élites empresariales y su aumento en privilegios y el espacio de acción que tiene, no solo en el proceso del tratado vinculante, lo vemos en otros procesos de Naciones Unidas, esto va acompañado de la opacidad de nuestros estados. Y en estos que son los garantes, ¿no? Y que este tratado tiene mucho foco en estados, pero estos estados están capturados. Estos estados no son los estados con los que comenzamos a discutir este tratado vinculante en el 2016. Entonces, y esto desde Poder hemos hecho algunos estudios sobre qué está pasando con esta captura del Estado ahora en pandemia, ¿no? Tanto que se habla de la pandemia. Bueno, se ha agudizado, ¿sí? Durante la pandemia muchas empresas declararon acciones esenciales, trabajos empresariales esenciales, cervecerías, el extractivismo no paró, los abusos a los derechos laborales aumentaron durante el poder corporativo, durante la pandemia. Entonces, esto de bajas de sueldo voluntarias, despidos masivos, sin liquidaciones de sueldo, renuncias forzadas, eso recorrió América Latina durante todo el año del COVID, y eso reforzó una situación ya preexistente. Por lo tanto, y lo último que hemos registrado en Poder, por ejemplo, es el poder de las grandes farmacéuticas, ¿no? Como muchas de las farmacéuticas se beneficiaron legalmente, en forma también, evadieron tributos para llegar a nuestras regiones en América Latina. Entonces también el tratado tiene que acompasar estos nuevos elementos, estos nuevos fenómenos. Y la captura del Estado está por detrás de este crecimiento de las transnacionales. El tercer elemento...
Por favor, Alejandra, el tiempo se concluya, por favor.
Ok. La debida diligencia fue algo muy comentado en el conversatorio. Lo quiero decir porque hay un movimiento muy fuerte que viene del norte, que está llegando al sur en términos de debida diligencia. Nosotros creemos que hay un lenguaje interesante en cuanto a este lenguaje para identificar, evaluar abusos que son potenciales. Existe un lenguaje hasta de derechos de las mujeres, ambiental, en cuanto a poder informar sobre estos potenciales daños y cómo poder comunicarlos a la sociedad, cómo poder prevenirlos. Pero aún esto es muy débil en cuanto a qué pasa si la empresa se lava las manos y dice que cumplió con los mecanismos de debida diligencia para no hacer frente a sus obligaciones posteriores. Quiero dejar 3 mensajes, por favor. De cara a lo que viene, ¿sí? Este proceso no puede decaer. El contexto de América Latina es muy diferente al que inició y dio vida a este proceso. Estamos en un contexto mucho más capturado por las empresas, nuestras democracias son más débiles, nuestras Naciones Unidas que alberga estos debates está mucho más débil. El foco tiene que estar en no decaerlo y en poder promover debates interseccionales que están recomendados en el reporte de octubre, que ayuden a avanzar en estos debates que son políticos, no son solamente técnicos. Necesitamos que el tratado y su lenguaje también alberguen y respondan a 3 agendas que son fundamentales. La ambiental, la de derechos laborales, que va a conversar el colega de los sindicatos, y la agenda de mujeres y de otros colectivos que están fuertemente impactados por las actividades empresariales. Un tratado que no aprenda de lo que está ocurriendo con la pandemia va a ser una oportunidad perdida para todos nosotros y va a provocar más muertes que el COVID. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Alejandra. Quisiera dar la palabra al compañero Iván González de la Confederación Sindical de las Américas. Tienes la palabra, Iván.
Gracias, Chena. Buenas tardes, buenos días, buenas noches. Compañeras y compañeros, agradecer bastante en nombre de la CCA y también de la Jornada Continental por la Democracia y contra el Neoliberalismo, que junto con otras organizaciones movimientos hacemos parte acá en la región y que estamos involucrados en el proceso de la campaña de nuestras diferentes articulaciones y que en la consulta del año pasado llamamos juntas nuestras organizaciones a ese debate. Alejandra colocó varios elementos de lo que es el contexto de la región. Sin embargo, yo diría que tenemos, a diferencia de 2019, una realidad que cerró con una movilización social muy fuerte en varios países. Esa movilización social y política está teniendo efectos. Revirtió el golpe de Estado en Bolivia, que es una cuestión importante para nosotros, un golpe articulado por la derecha y por intereses de las corporaciones a nivel internacional con apoyo de la OEA y de los Estados Unidos. Eso fue una importante victoria para los movimientos sociales de la región. También la movilización en Chile por una nueva constitución, las movilizaciones en Ecuador que pueden cambiar, mudar el escenario político interno, lo que tiene un impacto también en la región. Es decir, cierto que hay una ofensiva conservadora en la región, pero también es cierto que hay una respuesta de los movimientos sociales, sindicales, indígenas, campesinos, feministas, que dicen que, como lo señala el evento, está vivo, estamos vivos y vivas y vamos a seguir en esa agenda. En esa línea, cuando discutíamos el año pasado en el marco de la pandemia, ratificamos la importancia y lo fundamental de recuperar o de insistir de manera persistente en el sentido que le dio origen al grupo de trabajo con la resolución 26.9. Queremos un instrumento internacionalmente vinculante que se centre en las empresas transnacionales. Ya Alejandra dijo, nuestro foco, nuestra atención central debe estar colocada en cómo este tratado tiene que cubrir la responsabilidad de las empresas transnacionales, porque ellas son las principales responsables del escenario internacional de deterioro de los derechos, de ataque y de desconocimiento en todos los países y en el mundo. Es fundamental ratificar la primacía de los derechos humanos en el centro del instrumento. Nosotros no necesitamos que el instrumento cuide de los derechos de las empresas, que cuide de la dinámica que implica que los estados asuman responsabilidades que son de otros. El tratado tiene que estar centrado en los derechos humanos porque precisamente es el instrumento internacional de los derechos humanos los que han venido perdiendo preeminencia frente a los intereses de las corporaciones. Los derechos humanos entendidos en su globalidad, en el marco del comportamiento de las empresas. Las empresas tienen una acción que impacta sobre los derechos económicos, sociales y culturales en prácticamente todos los países. Vinculan la realidad de las violaciones a los trabajadores, las trabajadoras, a las comunidades, afectan el funcionamiento de la política, la democracia, interfieren sobre las políticas de tributación. Entonces, digamos, el tratado tiene que considerar eso y sobre todo la responsabilidad de las empresas en los crímenes contra los derechos humanos, crímenes incluso de lesa humanidad en algunos países. En la región tenemos casos como en Colombia, en donde se involucra directamente las empresas transnacionales en asesinatos y masacres en regiones contra movimientos campesinos, sindicales. Entonces eso tiene que estar claro, pero también claro en el tratado del impacto que tiene la acción de las empresas en crisis globales, crisis alimentaria, la crisis climática y todo lo que tiene impacto. Un instrumento que responsabilice a las empresas transnacionales en los daños y la violación de los derechos humanos y especialmente los derechos laborales a lo largo de la cadena global de producción, de la cadena global de valor, como lo llaman. Insistimos que es ahí donde, para el movimiento sindical, este tema es fundamental, porque es ahí donde se ocultan las principales violaciones desde el punto de vista del trabajo, de los derechos, del reconocimiento de las libertades sindicales, de la garantía de la nación colectiva, de la garantía del ejercicio de una cantidad de derechos que son fundamentales para un trabajo decente. Entonces, insistimos que ahí el tratado tiene que tomar en consideración que no es solamente la figura de la empresa, sino de lo que genera a partir de toda su cadena, la responsabilidad de solidaria de las casas matrices con las subsidiarias en otros territorios y que también eso implique el desmantelamiento del velo societario, el ocultamiento de los negocios, de quienes están detrás de las empresas, que muchas veces se ocultan para evadir precisamente la responsabilidad, no solamente desde el punto de vista de los derechos laborales o los derechos humanos, sino también de la responsabilidad que tienen con relación a los estados y a la tributación. Entonces, el tratado debe tener en consideración estas situaciones. Un tratado que sancione penal y administrativamente tanto a las empresas transnacionales como a las figuras, las personas jurídicas que se ocultan o que se utilizan para ocultar estas empresas. Y los paraísos, las guaridas fiscales son ejemplos de cómo las empresas juegan con estas personerías, con estas figuras, para ocultar su responsabilidad respecto de las violaciones. Y también la responsabilidad personal, individual, de directivos y de cargos de responsabilidad durante de las propias empresas. Y un tema fundamental dentro de todo lo que reivindicamos de la región es que se establezcan las obligaciones directas de las empresas para pagar salarios dignos, pagar impuestos, evitar la evasión y la elusión fiscal, y no discriminar, así como respetar, en el caso concreto de nuestras organizaciones sindicales, el derecho de huelga y sindicalización, que es el principal derecho colectivo, pero que genera además respuesta desde el punto de vista de los derechos individuales de los trabajadores y las trabajadoras. Concluyendo, de la región entendemos que la lucha por un tratado vinculante en el seno de las Naciones Unidas para responsabilización de las empresas y los derechos humanos hace parte de una acción también internacional para articular acciones políticas y sociales en el marco de la unidad de los movimientos sociales, de los sindicatos, de las organizaciones campesinas, del ambientalismo, de los feminismos, y eso lo tenemos claro acá en la región, y en esa línea vamos a seguir trabajando incluso en medio de una adversidad que nos implica a todos, que es la pandemia. Decir además, como decían varios ya, la pandemia ha servido para demostrar la falsedad del discurso hipócrita de las empresas sobre su responsabilidad social y donde este tema de la debida diligencia viene a ser parte también de una serie de fórmulas para evadir la responsabilidad de las empresas, para utilizar instrumentos voluntarios que sirvan para legitimar el discurso empresarial de responsabilidad, para utilizar lemas, consignas de los movimientos sociales como las cuestiones ambientales y el feminismo para lavar su imagen, pero además para inventar fórmulas como la debida diligencia que pretenden llevar a los países el cuidado de las obligaciones de las empresas, siendo que es una figura débil y que a menos que esté condicionada por un instrumento internacional como el tratado que estamos comprometidos, van a seguir siendo fórmulas para evadir la responsabilidad, para lavar la imagen de las empresas, sobre todo en países como los nuestros en el sur, donde los estados están capturados por las empresas y donde difícilmente alcancemos leyes nacionales de debida vigencia, por ejemplo, que tengan carácter obligatorio real. Entonces, por eso insistimos desde la región en la necesidad de un tratado vinculante como el que está expresado en la propuesta de la campaña que retoma elementos del documento de elementos presentado como primera iniciativa por la presidencia ecuatoriana y que posteriormente a ella hemos venido desarrollando elementos del punto de vista doctrinario y jurídico que nos dan la razón. Gracias, compañeras y compañeros. Estamos aquí para continuar el debate.
Muchas gracias, Iva. Quisiera recordarles que pueden hacer preguntas, que luego después de la región de Europa vamos a leer algunas preguntas en chat, entonces invitarlos a hacer las preguntas. Quisiera ahora entonces pasar a la región de Europa y tenemos entonces la compañera Juliet, que es de Amigos de la Tierra. Tienes la palabra, Juliet.
Primero habla Jill, Andrea.
Okay,
Thanks, Jenna. Hello. Yes, I am Jill from Friends of the Earth Europe, and I will speak on the European mobilization also with my colleague Juliette. So there is a strong and wide mobilization in European civil society for new binding rules on corporate accountability here. There is a lot going on a lot of different levels. We have national coalitions in a lot of countries, a lot of member states, and regional level coalitions of those national coalitions pushing for corporate accountability, binding rules, legislation at the national, the EU, and the UN level. In the past, historically, and up until now, these coalitions have been really engaged in the UN treaty process. The EU, meaning the European Commission mostly, has been really hostile to the negotiations in the past, and at the very best, they've been passive, staying out on the sidelines and not at the table, not in the deep in the negotiation. There has been some small constructive engagement from individual EU countries in the recent years in the negotiations, and this has really come from the civil society coalitions in those countries pushing their governments to be engaged and to speak up in the negotiations. And while the Commission stays pretty quiet. A lot of the work that we're doing in EU now is also really focused on this EU level legislation, which I will say something more about in a minute. We just had a campaign with 150 organizations in Europe who work on the different levels that was demanding EU laws, but also asking for them to be complementary and for the EU to engage at the same time in the UN treaty process. Before I say something about that, I wanted to mention that this mobilization, we do a lot on legal policy changes, but there's also civil society working on actual court cases, and a lot of that happening in Europe as well. Juliette can say more about, for example, Total in France. There's also climate cases underway, and I just wanted to quickly mention two cases against Shell in the EU that had recently had really interesting verdicts. So in the UK and in the Netherlands, civil society working with victims, with affected people, took Shell to court in the UK and in the Netherlands, where Shell has headquarters in both of those countries, for what Shell has been doing in Nigeria and in the Niger Delta with these decades of oil pollution and never bothering to clean up. So as Chika mentioned, this was really the first time in the EU that an EU parent company has been found to have a duty of care for the activities of its subsidiaries abroad and to be responsible for the harms inflicted on people as a result of something the subsidiary did in another country outside the EU. So the one in the Netherlands took 13 years. It's a really long time, and a lot of time was just completely wasted in these cases, arguing about whether the case should even be heard in the EU and whether the EU company, the Shell headquarters, had any responsibility for its subsidiary. So I think just, you all know this, but just to say that the fact that it takes such a long time to get this tiny shred of recognition that something that the parent company is responsible, something that should be obvious already, really shows that it's a really great victory and we're very happy, but it also shows how problematic the transnational system is and why we really need a new framework on access to justice, especially transnationally. This is why we also ask the EU for new laws. And there is, as you probably know, a new upcoming legislation in the EU on corporate accountability, and it's called a due diligence and corporate accountability law. This law does respond to some of the demands of civil society in the EU. There was a campaign in the last couple of years called Stop ISDS, and it was a campaign by a lot of civil society here. It linked the binding rules on corporate accountability with work on trade and investment and foreign investor rights. So it called for an end to foreign investor privileges like the ISDS mechanisms, and it also called for corporate accountability laws on national, EU and UN level. And it was supported by almost 850,000 people in the EU. So now a lot is happening on this EU law. It's getting a lot of attention. The European Parliament has really been paying a lot of attention to this. They did a big mobilization and just voted on a report calling for new laws that would force companies to look at their supply chains and prevent and account for harms in their supply chains. The report has a lot of good things, but it also falls really short of where we need to be. So we are also now demanding to the European Commission to do better with the proposal that it will come with. So in the summer, we will see the proposal from the European Commission, and then we will know finally what the outline of the law could look like. After that, it will be going back to the Parliament and to the member states, who will all need to negotiate with the Commission to get the final law, which will appear in about 3 to 4 years. There are obviously really big risks here. There's a lot of right-wing politicians in the EU and a lot of big business lobby groups, and they will all try really hard, and they've already started to try to make this a really weak law. But right now, the possibilities for what the law could be are still open. And so we're in a big battle to see if the law will be ambitious enough. It's very important as well because it will shape what the EU will do at the UN level, and it will shape the EU's approach to the treaty, which is why it's so important that we keep the pressure on the EU level too, and make sure that it includes our key demands. I didn't say much about what they are because I'll give over to Juliette now, who'll say something more about that. And I will have to leave a little bit early, so I apologize for that, but it was really nice to be here. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Gio. Entonces, da la palabra a Juliette.
Hello, everyone. Good to be with you and see so many people in this event. So to follow up on what Gila has said, so this new upcoming legislation debated at the European level shows that the issue of transnational cooperation and human rights is on the EU agenda, but it's also bring many questions about the articulation of this process with the UN treaty process. And we see some risk in this aspect because we see that some, both at the EU level...
Solo un ratito, Juliette, pero creo que estamos con problemas en la traducción al castellano. ¿Ahora se escucha?
Ahora sí.
Oh, perfecto, vale. Sigue, perdona.
Do you want me to start again, or is it okay?
Sí, sí, ahorita sí está bien.
Okay, okay. So I was saying that the risk that can bring the issue that we need to discuss and reflect on is the articulation between this EU process and the UN treaty process, because there can be some risk of this EU process. The first one being that both at the EU level and at member state level, many focus is made on this EU discussion. And so the risk is that they use this as an excuse to slow down even more their commitment and their implication in the UN treaty process. So a risk to slow down even more the UN treaty process. And the other risk is if at the end of the discussion in the EU, we have a weak legislation that is adopted at the EU level, then the EU will try to water down the content on the treaty to put it at the same level of the legislation that is adopted at the EU level. So now the battle that is beginning at the EU level, because it's not done yet. So it's really important that we put efforts now in the discussion at the EU level, because the impact will be also outside the EU. So that's why, as European civil society, we have two goals, I would say. The first one is to continue, as we have been doing, every year to continue to put pressure on the EU member states to participate in the UN treaty process, to speak on their own, not to wait for an EU mandate or the position, a common position of the EU, etc., but participation of the member states themselves. And the other battle is to push for our demands to be the same demands that we want, the same key elements that we want to tackle corporate impunity in the UN treaty. We want them also in the EU directive. So just to remind, I cannot tell all our demands, but some of the key demands that we are fighting for is the question of administrative, civil, and criminal liability along the supply chain. So, for instance, in the EU Parliament report, criminal liability is not considered, and we have also some question about the definition of control that is being made. So that's one battle. The second one that Jill has highlighted is the question of access to justice in the home countries of the transnational corporations. So to be able to have a court case in Europe for if you have a European transnational involved, even if the violation occurs outside Europe. And we need, in terms of access to justice, we need also, for instance, the reversal of the burden of the proof, more easy access to information and to evidence for the people affected, etc. And what we see now with this EU process, and to some extent also in some article in the article on prevention of the treaty, is the risk of focusing too much on due diligence. So this question of due diligence, it's in the title of this future EU law. The content of the EU law will go beyond, will need to go beyond this due diligence concept, but there is a strong focus on this. And why we think it's a risk is because due diligence is only about processes to, as was explained already before by others, processes to identify the risk and prevent the risk of violation. But mostly these processes and this risk identification and etc., they are auto-defined by the companies. And so if we see, for instance, from the examples of the French law on duty of vigilance, the French law goes beyond due diligence because it includes a duty to implement effectively the measures to prevent the violation and also liability mechanism. But even with that, the due diligence spirit is quite strong still in the French duty of vigilance law, and we see some obstacle this creates in the first legal action that we have. So we have this legal action against Total for its activities in Uganda, and of course it's also because it's the very first case, but we see that many debates in court are turning around the vigilance measures, so the prevention measures that Total has created, has elaborated. And so we focus the debates on the standards and on the processes mainly, what should the prevention measures look like, etc., instead of discussing about the violation themselves. And even in the appeal court, when we said that we should, the judge should rule more quickly on the case, they evaluated the emergency not considering what was happening on the ground in Uganda, but respect to the date of publication of the Total Vigilance Plan. So just to sum up the other, and I will finish because I think my time's up. The second risk that has also been mentioned earlier about due diligence is that due diligence is used as a way to escape responsibility. So what we ask is that it's not, so again, both in the EU discussion and in the UN treaty, because it's not clear also in the current draft, is that we need an obligation of results and not only an obligation of means. And we need also, and which is very important, we need direct liability for harm, which is totally independent from this prevention duty. And just one last word to conclude about all these discussions that are happening now in different countries for legislation at the national level, at the regional level, and of course the negotiation at the UN level, we think that all these, they should be complementary and they should build from the strengths of one another. So for instance, the EU debate should not start from zero. We have already 5 years of discussion at the UN level, so they should build from these demands. But we should also learn from the weaknesses of some of the process and not repeat the same mistakes. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Juliette. Gracias a todos los panelistas. Tenemos algunos comentarios en nuestro chat. El eurodiputado Elmete nos da saludos que va a seguir con esto debate y la discusión. El compañero Claudio nos llama mucho la atención que estos procesos regionales tienen también que hacer algún tipo de presión en los estados para que nos lleven nuestra opinión, ¿no? Que la posición que los estados presenten en las Naciones Unidas sea la posición también de las organizaciones. La compañera Isamar habla mucho de, voy a leer un poco su comentario, es más direccionado a Juliette, que es que el proceso europeo va a incidir e impactar mucho en todas las otras regiones y para América Latina cuando hablamos de debilidad de las leyes y gobiernos. ¿Cómo identifican en este momento actual y cuáles consideran los impactos sobre todo cuando participan en procesos de empresas como HIM, creo, Index, y con un enfoque fuerte con la diligencia de vida, un poco de la problemática que ahora está muy en escena de Europa, ¿no? De la diligencia de vida. No sé si más alguien quiere levantar la palabra para una intervención muy corta, porque luego volvemos a una fala final de los ponentes por región. ¿Alguien quiere hacer un punto más? Abrimos a un comentario muy cortito. ¿Puede levantar la mano? Bueno, sí.
Quizás yo, Chena.
Vale. Dale, Rafa.
Hola, buenos días. Muchas gracias a las intervenciones de todas y todos. Muy agradable ver todo este entusiasmo, ¿no? Y movilización a nivel regional. Solo un comentario, pregunta, un poco en línea de lo que decía Claudio. Creo que es súper importante intentar ser lo más concretos posibles. Es decir, que me parece que es clave intentar encaminar los debates que se han desarrollado a nivel regional junto con las ideas, propuestas y debates que surgieron en este evento, de encaminarlos hacia propuestas, recomendaciones y estrategias colectivas concretas, ¿no? De cabildeo, porque, como decía Claudio, las demandas y movilizaciones regionales tienen que ser escuchadas y consideradas por la ONU, por los Estados miembros, por nuestros gobiernos, ¿no? Entonces, mi pregunta de millón es cómo llevar a cabo una estrategia común, quizás también interregional, de incidencia hacia los gobiernos y hacia el grupo de trabajo que está negociando el tratado. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Rafa. No he visto ningún pedido más, entonces quisiera volver para una palabra final por región, para, quisiera comentar algunos de estos puntos que nos han levantado nuestros invitados. Y bueno, voy a empezar entonces con África, si que puede hacer un punto, un recorte final. Kea, tiene la palabra.
Hi, can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm really big final comments, but I wanted to stress that for the African continent, it's particularly important that we do get this legally binding treaty passed and moving, and really important for us to see if we can make sure that we can curb even corporate impunity in conflict-affected areas. That would be important for us to really look at and talk to. Over and above that, expanding free, prior, and informed consent to the right to say no or issues covering continuous consent. So making sure that communities and affected people are not only consulted, but they're at the forefront of making decisions. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Kia. Quisiera entonces pasar la palabra por la región latinoamericana a Iván para un comentario final.
Sí, gracias nuevamente la oportunidad y en nombre de la Confederación Sindical de las Américas y de la jornada por el espacio de intercambio y de compromiso. Y yo creo que eso es lo primero que hay que decir. Tenemos un compromiso con este proceso. Sabemos de la adversidad, no es ahora, es siempre que hemos tenido una situación adversa, pero entendemos que este es el camino porque es una responsabilidad que como movimientos tenemos. Sobre los desafíos, hay una cuestión que quiero compartir que Alejandra me pide. Hay que presionar, y estamos en una situación muy complicada por la pandemia, porque la pandemia justifica cualquier cosa, y es que las negociaciones tienen que volver de alguna manera, la presidencia del grupo debe volver a las sesiones interseccionales para poder avanzar en discusiones realmente técnicas y políticas del instrumento. Y eso está medio que estamos sujetos a lo que burocráticamente la presidencia del grupo haga, y como sabemos, y ahí paso a la segunda parte, como sabemos, esa presidencia está habilitada porque ese gobierno que presidió el proceso al inicio era muy importante y tenía un liderazgo, y ahora prácticamente ha entregado ese liderazgo al control de las corporaciones y gobiernos o grupos de gobierno como el de la Unión Europea. Entonces, la presidencia tiene que operar de otra manera. Y ahí es lo que creo que ese desafío que nos lanzan de cuál es lo que tenemos que hacer frente a los gobiernos. Y en la región, en el debate que hicimos el año pasado, pero también lo hemos dicho en otro momento, hay una tarea en las capitales. Ese problema no se resuelve en Ginebra, se resuelve aquí. Y los movimientos que hacemos parte de este proceso, tenemos una responsabilidad, en particular con los sindicatos en los países. Y hay países que son claves y lo hemos identificado. Hay un momento político en la región de cambio porque hay elecciones, porque hay nuevos gobiernos. Eso es una oportunidad, quizás recuperar la relación con el gobierno argentino, insistir con México, recuperar, ojalá, el gobierno ecuatoriano, que sería fundamental para un papel diferente en lo que sí el grupo de trabajo hasta ahora. Bolivia, involucrarlo más. Venezuela, que está ahí, pero no se involucra tan directamente. Cuba también. Es decir, la región tenemos gobiernos que pueden jugar un papel, y creo que es un desafío de la campaña articular eso. Y articular además con una acción concreta nacional, que es profundizar el debate de la importancia de instrumentos vinculantes a nivel internacional, pero también de una acción frente a las empresas de parte de nuestros gobiernos y de nuestros estados. Entonces creo que ahí hay un desafío que tiene que seguir, y sobre todo mantener vivo el proceso, y ese proceso no se mantendrá vivo si no es con la presencia de los movimientos sociales, de la sociedad civil y los gobiernos realmente comprometidos que están en ese proceso. Gracias, Shena.
Muchas gracias, y pasarle entonces a Juliette.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think I will focus my last comment on Isamar's question. So how we see the moments now, and also the issue of participation of big company in the process. So I think this is the issue of corporate capture is really not specific to the EU process. We see it at all level, national level, UN level, and of course in the EU it's quite it's so strong that it's quite institutionalized, this participation of company, but I don't see it so different to what we have in other regions. For working myself quite a lot on corporate capture issue. And what I see also is that we have some strong allies in the European Parliament, many members of Parliament that are both involved in the UN treaty process and in this now EU process, that I think it's a good point for us. And I think what we need to do, of course, it won't be an easy battle, and the the relation of power is not in our favor, but it's always the case. And so I think we really need to put pressure to for this EU proposal legislation to be as radical as possible, and exactly in the same way that the lobby will do anything to slow down its adoption and water down its content. We have to do everything to put all our more radical demands in all this legislation, again, at the national, regional, and international level, and all these levels really interact and can be used in the different process, I think, to put pressure on our governments. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Juliette. Quisiera ahora pasar para la palabra final de Manja, de Asia. Tenéis la palabra para un cierre muy cortito, por favor.
I'm not sure whether I should speak, but I'm willing to.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I think I want to emphasize that what we are seeing right now is especially this aspect of criminalization of dissent and of human rights defenders, of course. And so that language that prevents criminalizing dissent and speaking up needs to be put on board very strongly, because we are seeing arbitrary arrests and detentions all the time, all around us. The other aspect is that transnational corporations' adverse impacts are pretty differentiated amongst different communities in our region. So especially if you see from where I come from, you will see that particularly vulnerable groups could be the socially marginalized groups. Caste plays a huge role in my country, for example. Also, minority communities have differentiated impacts that must be kept in mind. And so any form of reparation or redressal needs to keep differentiated groups in mind when you work in Asia and South Asia in particular. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Quisiera preguntar a Manja si quiere decir como en un minuto también sus conclusiones.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity as well to have interaction and get updates from the other regions of the world. This is really very helpful, especially since it's really very daunting to have this civil society working on the lobbying, on engagement on the binding treaty, especially when we have many states which are not supportive. One of the strategies that the Asian Task Force had was to identify states who are friendly or not so friendly, or who are adverse to the binding treaty, and to plan how to approach each one of them. And this is done beyond the treaty negotiation process, or done in the national, at the regional level. We also recognize that even as we have an Asian task force, there is still very few organizations who are participating. So it is also a challenge for us to have more organizations involved from the region. And also a united global civil society voice is really very encouraging. So we support this kind of global activities. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos y todas panelistas por estar con nosotros hoy. Muchísimas gracias a todos que han participado también. Gracias a TNI, a Task Force, también al Grupo de África, también al TNI y Amigos de la Tierra, también a Rafa, que estuvieron acá apoyando todo. Decir que tenemos estos desafíos para seguir, que es más que todo articular nuestras luchas con pautas y demandas muy concretas para este tratado y llevar esto a nuestros estados, hacer presión en la capital y poder construir este desafío tan grande de cómo incidir en las Naciones Unidas. Decir que seguimos en lucha juntos en la campaña para paro del poder corporativo. Seguimos globalizando la lucha, globalizando la esperanza Estén en cuidado, con fuerza. Reciban nuestro abrazo, nuestro cariño por tanta resistencia y tantas cosas que hemos compartido. Muchísimas gracias a los intérpretes, un aplauso para todos ellos, muchísimo, que siempre están acá. Un abrazo a todos y que estén muy bien. Y ahí está el contacto de la campaña, seguimos en la articulación. Un gran abrazo, gracias a todos y todas. Chao, chao.
Gracias, Chena. Chao.